Feral is a comic series about cats living in an apocalypse. All the humans have left the area, leaving them to fend for themselves in the wild. And a strange disease is spreading, one that causes animals to become violent and hungry, to the point of killing and cannibalizing their kin. Believe it or not, the scary zombie virus in Feral exists in real life. It's called Rabies, and there are 70,000 deaths due to it in humans around the globe annually. But just how well does Feral depict this real-life disease? Join me in separating fact from fiction and discovering how accurate or not accurate rabies is in Feral. Before we get started, if you are new to this channel, please think about subscribing. I regularly post animal fiction content, so you'll never be bored. And to my current subscribers, thank you so much for supporting me. I wouldn't have gotten here without y'all. Let me give you some disclaimers before we begin. First of all, this video will contain spoilers for all Feral chapters, including ones that I did not get to in my Feral video and chapters that have been published since then. Second of all, this video will contain blood, guts, and everything us fans have come to love and expect from Feral. And finally, I understand that Feral is fiction. Not everything is going to be accurate to science, and sometimes you have to ignore science for the sake of telling a good story. This video is all in good fun, and I'm not mad at the writers for getting anything about rabies wrong. What I will get mad at them for in this video will be them going against the narrative and rules that they themselves have established about rabies in the comic. Now that we have all that out of the way, let's begin with some brief scientific gobbledygook about what rabies actually is. I'll try to keep this section as short as possible so we can move on to what you all are here for, Feral. Rabies is a viral disease caused by lyssaviruses, including, obviously, the rabies virus and the Australian bat lyssavirus. It can be transmitted to all warm-blooded species, but in lab conditions, it has been able to infect birds. It is transmitted primarily through saliva and through biting. The virus enters the body through wherever the bite or incursion is. It replicates in the host body and slowly makes its way up the central nervous system and to the brain. That process can take anywhere from 4 days to 3 years, depending on how far away the wound is from the host brain, the severity of the wound, and how much of the virus was introduced into the system initially. Once the virus finally arrives in the brain, symptoms start appearing soon after. The first signs are vague, like just a common headache or a fever, but as time goes on, it becomes obvious that this is no mere flu. And as it progresses even more, it falls into two categories. The first category is furious or hydrophobic rabies. It accounts for roughly 80% of all human cases. Furious rabies can last from a few days to a week. Its symptoms include, well, fury, aggression, fevers, and delirium. The type of rabies that we see in Feral is a strain of furious rabies. However, it is much different from any strain of rabies that we see in real life, as I will be talking about in subsequent sections. The second type of rabies that we see is dumb or paralytic rabies. It accounts for the other 20% of human cases. Paralytic rabies can last up to a month. Its symptoms include paralysis and weakness. Other symptoms of rabies I haven't mentioned so far include hydrophobia, the fear of water, hallucinations, muscle spasms, excessive salivation to increase likelihood of transmission, confusion, inability to swallow, and even aerophobia, the fear of air. Finally, no matter which type of rabies is present, the infected will fall into a coma and die. That's everything that I think you need to know about the real-life rabies before we talk about fictional rabies. So let's dive right into it. The strain of rabies present in Feral is different from any strain that we see in real life. That starts with how big the outbreak is. In Feral, the outbreak is so large that they've had to evacuate entire counties, in order that everyone is seemingly complied with besides for the old lady. One reason that is given for how large the outbreak is that it was a very productive springtime for local wildlife, with birth rates going up by up to 70%. Though this explains the prevalence of rabies in wild animals like raccoons and foxes, there is still something that bothers me when it comes to its prevalence in animals, specifically domestic ones. The spread of rabies to domestic animals should have been impeded by rabies vaccinations. We know that Feral takes place in America, and in many states, rabies vaccinations are required for cats and dogs. In a survey by Dr. Simon Haber of Texas A&M, 95% of dog owners report having vaccinated their dogs against rabies, and 88% of cat owners report having vaccinated their cats. However, it should be noted that those who are more likely to participate in scientific surveys are also more likely to actually listen to the science and vaccinate their animals, so there may be a bias there. Rabies vaccinations are very successful in ensuring that animals do not catch rabies, as only 2% of rabid dogs and 0.5% of rabid cats have had a history of rabies vaccination. Because of rabies vaccination rates and the success of the rabies vaccinations, you'd expect there to be a lot less rabies infections in the comic, as most of the characters should be vaccinated. However, it seems like every single cat or dog who gets remotely exposed gets infected, with a notable exception to the high infection rate that I will cover later. However, the strain of rabies present in feral is a novel strain. The strain likely evolved so that the rabies vaccine is ineffective against it. Therefore, I don't find the severity of the outbreak and the fact that it's infecting animals that should have been vaccinated to be too out of the question. In feral, even the smallest of scratches can lead to rabies. This is true in real life. It doesn't matter the initial dosage that you get of it, you will still die of it. It will just take longer for the virus to replicate in your system if you've had a smaller dose. The exception to this is if you get vaccinated pre or post exposure, as your body can fight off the virus thanks to vaccines. In this image, Patch is even licking the wound that he got from a rabid animal, which means that he's likely putting even more infected material into his body. Not the smartest move, Patch. But though the smallest of scratches can lead to infection, there's a notable source of infection that is not present in feral. That being, our characters now seem to be able to eat the infected without becoming infected themselves. In real life, eating infected meat is just another way for the rabies virus to enter the bloodstream. Such a fact used to be reflected in the story. Our protagonists have always assumed that consuming infected meat will result in them becoming infected as well. With the exception that one time with a lady, a lot of people assumed that she had rabies. I don't actually think she had rabies. I think that she had toxoplasmosis, but anyways. This all went out the window in chapter 11, where we are introduced to Lucky and his dog Moosh. Moosh eats infected animals. When our protagonists exclaim in shock that Moosh will get infected, Lucky explains that he is also eating meat from infected animals and is obviously not sick yet. While Lucky is an absolute two-timing con man who cannot be trusted, I'm inclined to trust him on this. Now, as I said, if you eat the meat of something with rabies, the chances are high that you will get rabies. Unless the body's been left out for long enough that the virus has died, in which case there are other issues. Or in the case that you've cooked the virus out, which is not the best thing to do. Again, you can't guarantee that you got all the virus out. However, none of the characters who have eaten infected meat have shown signs of rabies yet. You never know what twists and turns the authors may take, but until that turn happens, I'm going to assume that Lucky was telling the truth. In which case, how can they eat infected meat without getting infected? My first answer is that they are not eating the brain, brainstem, or any part of the nervous system, as rabies tend to congregate in those areas. Lucky and Moosh do not have a love for tacos de sesos, so they are likely just eating the flesh, but the flesh still has rabies. The second reason could be that Lucky and Moosh may be vaccinated. Moosh is a Rottweiler, an expensive breed, and thus was likely not born a stray. Lucky has said that he has raised Moosh. Because of that, I think that they could have lived in a home together and been vaccinated by their owner. However, we've already gone over how the rabies vaccine does not work against the strain seen in feral. Maybe since they are eating it and it is not direct bloodstream exposure, they are able to fight off the virus with help from the vaccine, but they are literally eating mouthfuls of meat at a time, so I don't think that's the case. Overall, I can't really find an explanation as to why they've not gotten rabies from eating infected meat yet. I understand why the authors made it so that they could eat infected meat, as at this point, everything that cats prey on, from rats to bats to mice, have been shown to have rabies, so it's convenient that they can now eat those and not have to rely on fish and birds all the time. Another place where feral's rabies diverges from reality is in the timeline. The incubation period of rabies plus how long the rabies infected animals last for. The incubation period of rabies in real life is on average 3 months. However, that is not a definite. Some cases have taken as little as 9 days to incubate or as many as 3 years to do so. In feral, some feral characters turn practically right after being bitten. However, with Patches, it takes around a week, which is more realistic. Now let's get into the weeds with how long characters last for after they've been infected. The timeline of feral is not written out for us, so I'm just going to assume that the story starts in early fall, and that currently we are around the beginning of spring. That's roughly 6 months. Patch got infected at the beginning of the story in early fall. He turns in issue 4 after the group reaches his house. In issue 6, he fights a dog and kills it. Then he lasts all the way until issue 11, when he goes out fighting a bear, right before spring begins. Overall, Patch was infected for around 5 months. In real life, once one shows signs of rabies, they typically only last for 2 weeks, which is a much shorter amount of time. The final cause of death is usually related to a stroke or seizure, as rabies attacks the brainstem. Let's assume that part of the reason of why this strain is so successful is that it only does not kill its host in that way and keeps them alive for as long as possible. We still have to deal with dehydration due to hydrophobia, and difficulties in breathing as the brainstem is attacked. Those are also killers. Looking away from Patch, the outbreak started over 6 months ago, and it seems like everything from rats to deers to cats to dogs to probably humans have been infected with rabies. At this point, realistically, everything should be dead due to complications with rabies, and the few remaining infected starving from lack of prey because they killed everything. Let's just wave away the fact that rabies kills once again and says that straight up does not in this universe. Rabies still has symptoms: seizures, difficulties breathing, and hydrophobia, all things that would not be good for one's health. Animals with rabies also struggle with coordination, leading to jerky movements. However, all the infected animals in feral appear to be in good shape. They do not struggle with their mobility and balance, and can even climb trees. In fact, they appear unusually strong. Patch takes on a dog in a fight, and wins to the point where he's somewhat disemboweled before him. Even a regular cat cannot do that. Overall, the rabies in feral makes no sense. That's because this isn't really a story about rabies, this is a zombie apocalypse story. Just like how The Last of Us isn't about cordyceps, it's about zombies, and the way that people react to them and how social dynamics form in a post-apocalyptic environment. Public imagination of zombies says that they can be unusually strong and fast, so the infected animals are. It would be a boring story if all the animals died of rabies or if the living dead decayed. So they don't. So yes, rabies is not realistic. However, that's not too much of a bug. It's a feature because the story really never was about rabies. So far, we've mainly gone over how rabies in feral is very unrealistic. But what small details about rabies does feral get right? First of all, on the surface, Patch's hallucinations may seem like a way for us to see his and Elsie's past, but in reality, rabies really does cause hallucinations in people. Second, we've already gone over it, but the fact that rabid animals are hydrophobic is consistently remembered in the series. The characters use water as a barrier between them and the infected animals all the time. They even go out when it's raining to try and minimize the chance of running into infected animals. The only exceptions to their usually stellar accuracy is that they once drew a rabid raccoon drinking water in issue 1. Though, to play devil's advocate, it may just be laying by the river as part of exposure therapy. So that's how rabies is currently presented in the series. One thing that I never hope happens in the series in the future is someone recovering from rabies, as rabies has an 100% mortality rate. Once the virus has hit the brain and one starts showing psychological symptoms, there's pretty much nothing left to be done except for highly experimental treatments and crossing your fingers. Some people who've done research into rabies might be typing comments right now about how there is one person who has survived rabies. Gianna Geist contracted rabies and suffered severe symptoms that caused severe fatigue and lapses in consciousness. She was subjected to the experimental Milwaukee protocol and put into a coma, but she eventually recovered and lives a normal life today. However, it was never confirmed that what Gianna had was rabies. Some scientists believe that she did not have rabies, but instead she had a less virulent lithovirus. That in no way takes away from how impressive her recovery is. It's just that she may not have survived rabies particularly. There are 5 other cases of people surviving rabies other than Geiss's. Hers is just the most popular one, and some scientists believe that the virus they were infected by, too, was a less severe lethal virus. In addition, it should be noted that the Milwaukee Protocol has been deemed to be ineffective. Gianna's survival was really due to genetics and good luck. So, long story short, if you get rabies or any lethal virus remotely close to it, you should start writing your will. And if you survive, you are a statistical error pretty much. Such a statistic of 100% fatality might cause some of you to start shaking in fear. What if I get rabies? But rest assured, if you get bitten by an animal with rabies and get the necessary shots within 6 days, you are practically guaranteed to not develop rabies. When it comes to feral, a character recovering from a type of rabies would literally beat 99.99999% odds. But it's not just the science of a character recovering from rabies that I disagree with. Having a character recover from rabies establishes that it is something that can be done and opens the door for other characters to recover from rabies. That dramatically lowers the stakes of the entire story. So for the sake of science and the story, I really hope no cat ever gets better from rabies. Overall, the depiction of rabies in feral doesn't exactly line up with how rabies is in real life. The rabies in feral behaves more like your average zombie virus. That's because that's what feral is, a zombie comic with an animal reskin. And sometimes you have to change the facts in order to tell a compelling story. That's all I have to say about rabies and feral. Do the inaccuracies bother you or not? And what do you think about the more recent chapters of feral? It's been a while since I've talked about this comic at all, and I'm interested in what you guys think. Comment down below. And if you like this video, feel free to subscribe. I make animal fiction videos pretty often, and your support would mean a lot to me. And to those who are already subscribed, thank you so much for your continued support. I wouldn't have gotten here without y'all. Peace, Rogan out.